Everyone. The recording is in progress. Welcome. My name is Tyler Sprague. I'm the current president of Docomomo WEWA. On behalf of the Docomomo US WEWA board, I'd like to welcome you to our evening lecture, Three Pillars of Practice, the Remarkable Life of Benjamin McAdoo Jr. So most of you know about Docomomo. We are a preservation advocacy group sustained by a grant from For Culture, which lets us offer wonderful events like this. So as you just heard, we are recording this event. So if you'd like to view this afterwards, please get in touch with us for access, but just be mindful that we are recording this for future reference. So the work you're going to see presented tonight is a product of the Benjamin McAdoo Research Collective. So it's a relatively new sort of thing. It's a group with an open approach to scholarship and research where work into the life and designs of Benjamin McAdoo is collected and shared freely. This project got its start with a generous grant from the UW College of Built Environments, an Inspire grant at the beginning of the year. This enabled us to bring on tonight's speaker, UW architecture student Sierra Miles, as our researcher. So through Sierra's research and writing, Benjamin McAdoo Jr.'s remarkable life has emerged spectacularly once again through scholarship. Not only the first Black architect registered in Washington State, McAdoo was a vital part of the modernist scene in the Pacific Northwest. He was well-known in Seattle's architectural community in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and also for his weekly radio addresses on civic and urban issues in the early 1970s. He designed remarkable custom homes, smaller scale affordable houses of merit, churches, and public projects. McAdoo used his platform to advocate for Black liberation, promote housing equity, and challenge the institutionalized racism that surrounded mid-century life. Understanding his work is vital to expand the modernist narratives and context present in the Pacific Northwest. So with this initial grant, Sierra's work has been supported by Docomomo US WEWA and BOLA Architecture Planning, support we are really grateful for. Sierra is continuing to research this quarter with new access to the McAdoo archive at the UW Special Collections. So this is an ongoing project and there is still so much more to explore. So we encourage others to celebrate and share his work, reach out to us with resources or ideas. And after roughly 45 minutes talk here by Sierra, we're going to have time for some question and answer and more discussion. So with that, please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Sierra Miles.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I want to apologize in advance that you will see the top search bar throughout the presentation, a little technical difficulty on my end. But hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to share the research that I've been working on as part of the Benjamin McAdoo Jr. Research Collective. When I began the project, I started analyzing Benjamin McAdoo's project list, which contained over 500 professional works within his 34-year career. I recognized three distinct patterns within his professional work, and I identified them as the residential pillar, the community leadership pillar, and the institutional pillar. During McAdoo's early career from the 1940s to the 1950s, the focus of his work was primarily on residential single-family homes and multifamily dwellings. The projects ranged in scale from new builds to small renovations, remodels, add-ons, and additions. At this time, affordable housing was a key focus, and he would go on to complete over 200 projects in just 5 years. The second pillar begins in the 1960s, when Benjamin McAdoo becomes an integral part of the regional civil rights movement by taking on leadership roles with the NAACP and the Central Contractors Association. During this time, bringing equality in housing, education, and job opportunities was his top priority. This directly propelled him into what has been determined to be his third and final pillar of practice, the institutional and industrial focus of the 1970s. McAdoo readjusts and narrows his focus on bringing large industrial and institutional projects to minority-owned construction and architecture businesses in the Seattle area. In this period of his late career, his projects slowed in quantity and grew in scale. Now let's start from the beginning. The ambitious architect was born Benjamin Frank McAdoo Jr. on October 29th, 1920 in Pasadena, California, to parents Benjamin F. McAdoo Sr. and Alfreda Durelsel McAdoo. Benjamin Jr. was the eldest of 4 children. His father was a carpenter, and as a child, Benjamin Jr. would assist on flooring projects. The budding interest in architecture thus began. He would attend Pasadena Junior College and graduate in 1940 with an associate's degree. He continued his collegiate studies at the University of Southern California. And by 1942, World War II was crippling Europe, and 22-year-old Benjamin McAdoo Jr. registered for the World War II draft, which can be seen in the upper left image. Later the same year, he would wed registered nurse Alice Thelma Dent McAdoo before they set out for a new adventure. In 1949, the newly wedded couple left the Sunshine State behind and set out to Seattle, Washington, where Benjamin McAdoo would continue his studies at the University of Washington. Attending for his senior year, McAdoo graduated in 1946 with a Bachelor of the Arts in Architecture and would make history as the first Black architect in Washington State. Post-graduation, he hit the ground running and opened his own firm out of the garage of his home, named Benjamin F. McAdoo Jr., where he would work as principal architect until his passing. During the first 6 years after graduating, from 1947 to 1952, Benjamin McAdoo is mentioned in the Seattle Times for his residential work 6 times and completed 205 projects. Benjamin McAdoo's architectural philosophy around affordable housing allowed clients to collaborate with him for smaller projects. And as the clients acquired additional financial resources, they would continue building on the project. In his projects list, it is evident that he held this relationship with many clients. McAdoo would work on several renovation projects that converted single-family homes into multifamily dwellings, such as duplexes. Quickly, his specialty became single-family residences and multifamily residences. By 1950, Benjamin McAdoo designed the House of Merit, which was a modest single-family home and would propel him into creating over 80 similar affordable single-family homes in the Capitol Hill area, which were priced at $7,000 and $7,500. These striking Pacific Northwest mid-century modern residences inspired many builders at the time to adopt his plans due to the ease of construction. In the same year, 1950, the Benmar Apartments made waves as chic and modern affordable housing. It was named after his first 2 children, Benjamin and Marcia. McAdoo and his wife Alice would have a total of 3 children throughout their marriage. The Benmar Apartments was a modern apartment complex comprised of 4 one-bedroom apartments and 5 two-bedroom apartments. These photographs on the right are the pre-construction site photos. The location was praised by the Seattle Times for its strategic positioning near bus lines traveling to the University District, Madison Park, and downtown. This apartment complex had the unique feature of individual entrances to each apartment and large terraces serving as an outdoor living space. The floor-to-ceiling windows in each apartment living room took advantage of the panoramic views of Mount Rainier and the Cascades. In addition, each apartment is plentiful with built-in storage to simplify the interior space for the tenants. The modern amenities of the apartment building included a fully automatic thermostat controlled by an oil-fired air furnace. This gave each tenant the ability to regulate temperature of their unit. The apartment listing boasted, "Hot or cold, have it your way at the Benmar." The Benmar Apartments were part of the Affordable Housing Program with the Federal Housing Administration. In the rental housing occupancy report in the upper right, it lists that a 1-bedroom apartment was $67.50 per month, and a 2-bedroom apartment was $72.50 per month. The building was designed and owned by Benjamin McAdoo. He and his wife Alice would be acting landlords until 1957. In 1948, 2 years after graduation, Benjamin McAdoo completed the Morehouse residence. Receiving glowing praise in the Seattle Times, this early work cemented McAdoo as a groundbreaking modernist in the newly blooming Northwest modernism movement. 73 years later, in present day, the residence has maintained its integrity and undergone no structural modifications and very minimal interior modifications. Seen in the city scale on the right and the neighborhood scale on the left, the Morehouse residence, annotated in yellow, is located in the Northwest Magnolia neighborhood of Seattle. The residence is positioned in an orthogonally planned suburban area. Each property has a generous amount of outdoor living space on the back and front of the properties. And a mere 3 blocks southeast is a large public park and public library. The Morehouse residence was constructed in 1948 when Seattle residents were living under a strict housing ordinance known as redlining. Redlining is a discriminatory process that used racial restrictive covenants to segregate, redline, residents into specific areas of the city. For those that might not be familiar with the harm of this practice, it hindered the ability for those within the confined areas to grow home equity wealth and grow businesses. For more information, the Northwest African American Museum discusses the history and contemporary impact redlining has on our city today. The Morehouse residence was constructed in an area of Magnolia that was redlined in the lowest grade of security and a thinly outlined hazardous area, Category D. The discriminatory laws would continue to define the inequality of the region until the late 70s. The generational impact these laws had on Seattle residents is unquantifiable when combined with the emotional trauma. However, a glimpse into the damage the restrictive housing practices had might be best visualized when examining the property values. The trajectory of the Morehouse residents' property value over the most recent 10 years shows a skyrocketing 180% increase in value. The property was valued at $450,000 in 2011, and today it is valued at $1.3 million. It is important to note that the increase in value at this specific property is not due to the design and construction by a prolific architect such as Benjamin McAdoo. The surrounding area of Magnolia has been rapidly increasing over the last decade. The rapid growth in the housing market can be partially attributed to the technology sector bust through the 2010s that resulted in accelerated gentrification in many Seattle neighborhoods. Zooming into the plot plan, we can clearly observe the natural grade change. The lot size is 5,797 square feet with a noteworthy elevation increase at the east and west end of the property. To keep costs down for the clients, McAdoo would opt to not excavate or level the site, but rather his design process was informed by the change in grade. In the images to the right, they are at the west end of the property, the backyard. McAdoo designed an elevated terrace outdoor living space that is detached from the main structure. This gave the clients sweeping views of Mount Rainier and the Seattle Vista. The design of the design of the outdoor circulation allows us to see that McAdoo had finally adapted his mid-century modern style to the natural landscape of the Pacific Northwest, despite only residing in the area 3 years prior to design and construction. Climbing 13 narrow stairs brings forth the main entrance portal positioned facing east. With 2 entrance options, the front door and the carport garage are points of access on the east elevation. The post and beam structure has an inviting facade clad in Roman brick and cedar paneling. The Magnolia Morehouse residence is 1,800 square feet, containing 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and is constructed in a distinct Pacific Northwest mid-century modern style. Running parallel to the entrance, we can see the original roof sunshades above the floor-to-ceiling windows of the upper-level living room. Roof sunshading above floor-to-ceiling windows would continue to be a defining feature for McAdoo's designs. I'd like to note the highlighted yellow annotation is my own to guide us through. In a 1949 Seattle Times article, Marjorie R. Phillips published the floor plan of the Morehouse residence. Looking at the exterior elevations, the east elevation holds 11 windows that allow light to cascade in from the east and south direction into the entrance, living room, dining room, master bedroom, and recreation room. And the southeast corner of the living room has floor-to-ceiling windows to provide sweeping views of the Seattle and Mount Rainier Vista. Also seen in plan, once entering the structure, one must either ascend to the upper level or descend to the lower level. The split level construction has a staircase at the entrance door and at the opposite end of the structure near the backyard exit. McAdoo uses built-in units in every residential project, possibly because he grew up watching and helping his father work as a carpenter. In section, we can see the west wall of the built-in closet storage in the master bedroom. In the top right image, we can see this feature remains today. The images on the right add context to the staircase entrance, showing the interior circulation to the basement recreation space to the upper level living space. McAdoo had a clear understanding of the programmatic circulation through his residences by intentionally using the sunken basement for recreation and the elevated level as a communal gathering space. The carport is positioned north of the front door and doubles as a terrace for the second floor master bedroom. The prominence of the carport represents a shift in architectural design that reflects the economy's growing reliance on the automobile industry during the 40s and 50s. The carport plays a significant role in this early residential design. That would go on to be a defining detail of his style. In the floor plans, we can also see heavy poche on the brick fireplace that extends itself from the lower level recreation room to the upper level living room. Using one chimney stack, McAdoo used a double flue fireplace to bring heat to both floors. This is yet again another feature that would be repeated in many of his prominent residential projects. Seen here in the interior elevations, the fireplace uses Roman brick. The lower level has a wood storage recessed into the fireplace, and on the upper level, the fireplace has a built-in bar to the north. Both remain today in original condition, despite the upper level fireplace having been recently painted. This site would solidify 28-year-old Benjamin McAdoo as a key player in Pacific Northwest modernism. 6 years later, Benjamin McAdoo would go on to design the George Hage residence and receive Home of the Month award from the AIA in 1957. McAdoo is receiving great recognition in the architectural community during this time, and concurrently, he decided to step into the political sphere. He shakes feathers as he runs for state representative from the 37th district against Paul Rebel. In 1954, he was nominated in the primary and was second on the Democratic ticket behind Fred Dorr. McAdoo was taken to court on the grounds of ineligibility due to the place of residence before the election was held. In attempts to disqualify McAdoo, it was proposed that he was not a legal voter in the 37th district. He owned multiple residences at the time, and this was used to blur his legibility and his campaign. The Washington State Supreme Court's decision effectively disqualified him, although this would have effectively disqualified over 40,000 King County voters in addition to McAdoo. Nonetheless, it was only Benjamin McAdoo that was determined to be ineligible to vote in the state's representative election of the 37th district, and thus dismantling his political campaign. Benjamin McAdoo spoke to the Seattle Times and stated, "I feel that the loss of the Democratic seat was the direct result of the voters' repudiation of the actions taken by Rebel. During this time, he is president of the NAACP and holds regular discussions with the public about various issues facing the Black community in the city of Seattle." 1 year after running for office, in 1955, Benjamin McAdoo would design a residence for Kenji and Kima Ota. The Otas were a Japanese family that commissioned Benjamin McAdoo to design a single-family home in the neighborhood of Rainier Beach for their growing family. The Ota residence, annotated in yellow, is in the neighborhood scale on the left, is located in South Seattle, neighborhood of Rainier Beach. The residence is tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac with a generous outdoor space at the north end of the property. The urban plan takes on an organic grid system with a large main street cutting through the neighborhood. Redlining housing ordinances affected all minorities living in Seattle, including the Japanese community. In the year of 1956, the Rainier Beach neighborhood was zoned in yellow as definitely declining. By classifying these areas as hazardous, the city of Seattle greatly underfunded the predominantly Japanese community within. If we look at the trajectory of the property value, it resembles a very similar increase as a Magnolia Morehouse residence. The property value has skyrocketed 177% in the last 10 years. It was valued at $290,000 in 2011, and today the property is valued at $813,000. Understanding and contextualizing the history of the neighborhood with its present day context of gentrification, the harms of institutionalized racism and its effect on the generational wealth can be understood by a somewhat tangible monetary figure. In 1956, the Japanese community was not only living within the redlining housing restrictions of Seattle, but also confronting the racism that mounted locally from the Japanese internment 11 years prior. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066. This would shake and destroy the lives of thousands of Japanese people living in the United States. The military order forcibly removed people of at least 1/16 Japanese descent, US citizens included, into what was then called concentration camps. The name was later changed to internment camps. At the height of World War II, the order resulted in over 100,000 people of Japanese descent to be relocated to military camps. The images here were taken a month after the order was signed, when 227 Japanese Americans from Bainbridge Island were ordered to sell their property and their belongings and bring with them only one single suitcase. Their entire livelihood in one suitcase. This order lasted from 1942 to 1945 and would devastate the local Japanese community. The Kenji Ota residence is historically significant as it shows a return to Seattle and a rebuilding of the community lost. Built 11 years after the return, Rainier Beach would be one of the few areas people of Japanese descent could rent or purchase land. Benjamin McAdoo's community was facing the same housing restrictions, and he fought actively against the racist legislation. Working together, McAdoo and Ota designed a single-family residence that would signify the unity between the Japanese community and the Black community as they fought for equality in the city of Seattle. My images of the entry sequence on the right show the post and beam superstructure is clad in brick and vertical cedar panels with a flat roof and poured concrete foundation. It has McAdoo's signature feature of a prominent carport. However, at this property, it's concealed and tucked away from street view. This sequence is west facing the carport entrance of the south elevation. The flat parapet roof is carried over the entryway and carport, creating the effect of an eaves overhang. The overhang is supported by exposed beams and wooden louvers at the outer edge of the carport, shielding the car from street view. The brick chimney punctuates the roof and is a double flue chimney stack. The upper level has a two-way fireplace dividing the living room and dining room, and a single facing fireplace on the lower level. Coming from the south carport entrance to the east elevation, there's an exterior circulation path leading from the carport to the outdoor living space. Coming from the south carport to the east, down 9 steep concrete steps brings a spacious backyard. Along the east elevation is the kitchen and dining room. Both have large bay windows with a long span roof sunshade above these windows. This post and beam superstructure has 2,540 square feet of living space as a 2-floor split level construction structure. Following alongside the east facade takes one to the back garden of the property, which has a wood veneer path leading to the north entrance. Just as with the Morehouse residence, Benjamin McAdoo is sensitive to the site and uses the natural elevation of the site to inform his designs. Trees and natural vegetation engulf the property, giving a natural canopy of privacy to the backyard. McAdoo's design process of working with the natural topography of the landscape successfully incorporated the steep grade drop at the northwest end of the property without excavation or leveling. This allowed for the back of the property to be landscaped as a Japanese garden oasis for the Otas. With the greenery of the Pacific Northwest, a flowing Japanese water rock garden was placed just beyond the lower deck, not pictured, unfortunately. The flowing river was built to extend from the Ota property into their neighbor's backyard to the west. This flowing river symbolized the community the Japanese neighbors felt for one another. In a time when the Japanese people were returning to Seattle to rebuild what was taken from them during World War II, the flowing rock garden between neighbors stood as a symbol of culture and community that was stronger together. Combined with plants, rocks, and water, this space served as a peaceful, contemplative outdoor space for the family. These photographs were taken on the lower level of the residence at the north elevation. McAdoo created two separate and distinct outdoor spaces on the north end of the property. The upper level terrace spans 24 feet and provides an enclosure for the lower level deck. The upper level terrace gives sweeping views of the Seattle skyline and provides an elevated experience through the floor to ceiling windows overlooking the treetops. While the lower level deck is an immersive experience with the groundscape and concealed from view. Now here's my favorite drawing set that I've discovered in my research, the heavily annotated floor plan and the interior section of the OTA residence. We can see McAdoo annotated the shoji sliding screens. Looking at the plan, the entrance is located on the south elevation. Upon immediate entry, facing north, the floor to ceiling sliding shoji screens come into view just past a staircase which descends to the lower level. Proceeding to the first floor, sliding the shoji screen to the right, the open living space comes into view. Floor to ceiling windows showcase the north end backyard with sweeping views of the tree canopies. The shoji screens have two fixed panels and one sliding panel, giving the living space privacy from the entry door windows, a beautiful detailing of Japanese architecture. East of the shoji screens is a tokonoma, positioned between the two-way fireplace. The tokonoma is a traditional in traditional Japanese homes and serves as a dedicated room to display Japanese paintings, calligraphy, scrolls, and ornaments. In Japanese architecture, this space is to be positioned opposite the entrance, as we can see displayed here. The exterior wall of the tokonoma that faces the kitchen has a built-in desk and study space. This is a show of McAdoo's ability to simplify the design by providing built-in elements that support the client's lifestyle. Using materials not typically seen in his interior spaces, but are commonly found in Japanese architecture, McAdoo blends his own personal style of modernism with traditional Japanese architecture and creates a residence that is special to the Ota's Japanese heritage and Pacific Northwest lifestyle. Incorporating architectural elements and materials not seen in previous work, McAdoo cultivated a unique space for the Otas to call home. Not only is Benjamin McAdoo a significant Northwest architect, but this house is an excellent example of his modern residential architectural style. It's also a character-defining house for the Rainier Beach neighborhood. 5 years later, we move into the second pillar of practice of the international and national activism focus of Benjamin McAdoo's career. The key marker for this distinction in Benjamin McAdoo's career is when he and his family moved to Jamaica. His focus on local policy had taken a shift to the international scale. In 1961, Benjamin McAdoo was appointed Chief Housing Advisor for the United States Agency on International Development in Jamaica, where McAdoo created modular housing prototypes designed to be assembled by unskilled workers. In Jamaica, he began working with precast concrete, as the materials used in the Pacific Northwest would not be suitable for the climate of Jamaica. This would be the primary material used for the assembly parts of the modular housing. McAdoo's designs were successfully and widely manufactured and used throughout Jamaica. And after a successful stay in 1963, he and his family would move to Washington, D.C. for 1 year. And during this time, the March on Washington took place. During his stay in Washington, D.C., McAdoo worked to establish the Latin America division of the United States Agency on International Development and was employed by the General Services Administration's Public Building Services. In addition to his federal work, McAdoo was a coordinating architect with Edward Stone on the $45 million John F. Kennedy Center of Performing Arts before returning to Seattle in 1964. While Benjamin McAdoo and his family were abroad in Jamaica, the tensions were mounting back in the United States. The summer of 1963 had national civil rights protests across the nation. As Black citizens demanded equality and just legislation nationally, McAdoo would be returning to a heightened awareness of the inequality his community was facing in the city of Seattle by 1964. The same year he returned to Seattle, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. However, later in the same year, the city of Seattle voters defeated an open housing ordinance that would put an end to property segregation. Seattle voters, 92% white, were fighting to maintain redlining. Returning to Seattle in 1964, Benjamin McAdoo would continue as principal of his private practice and work as special assistant chief of the design and construction branch of the City of Auburn's Public Building Services Department. Upon his homecoming to the Pacific Northwest, McAdoo assumed the position of president of the NAACP Seattle chapter until 1968. While McAdoo was president of the NAACP, he held weekly radio broadcasts centered around various social justice and civil rights issues facing the Seattle community. He began looking towards policy and political change, and rather than being written about for his professional architectural work in the Seattle Times, he began taking out columns in the newspaper to address community issues involving police brutality, education segregation, redlining, and over-policing of Black communities. Once stepping down from his post as president, Benjamin McAdoo became acting chairman of an up-and-coming group called the Concerned Citizens of the Central Area. As acting chairman, he would organize protests in the community. In the newspaper clipping above, we can see an article from the Seattle Times in August 1968, reporting the mass arrest tactics used by police. Historically, police use of this tactic of arresting peaceful protesters is used to dismantle the protesters' desires to organize as a collective. And it is a common fear tactic still used today. 2 years later, in 1970, Benjamin McAdoo narrows his focus on the inequalities of career opportunities for Black people and other minorities in the construction profession. McAdoo co-founds the Central Contractors Association, the CCA, with Tyree Scott, electrician, seen in the bottom right image directing protesters at the UW. The CCA was an offshoot of the Seattle Model Cities program that organized local Black independent contractors to seek equality within the profession. The CCA members were denied opportunities due to racial discrimination, which was illegal based on federal civil rights legislation. The CCA organized direct action protests, which included shutting down major construction sites through the city of Seattle. They protested at the University of Washington and successfully shut down 25 construction sites. A few years later, on November 2nd, 1975, Benjamin McAdoo gave an interview about the protests at the University of Washington depicted here on the right. I will read part of the transcript in Benjamin McAdoo's own words to describe how the events unfolded. Quote, "I don't think you ought to uncover your hand, the violent side, unless you really have some strength to go all the way with it. Right after the incident, the walkout, I was up negotiating with the police. They closed down the job site and they refused to not call the police. The police officers were stationed off the job site in a bus. They were the tactical ones, the ones with the big long clubs. Their helmets had visors and things. And so when I got back to the site, the demonstrators were leaving. And we walked across the street on 15th Avenue, and Tyree was addressing them with one of those bullhorns. And the crowd was standing there near Schutz Hall that was under construction, and the police, when I was walking off the grounds, I heard them saying to some of the workmen or someone, 'Can you identify any of them?' And so then I got across the street and passed the word to people who might have been involved, especially in the bulldozing of the trucks, that they would have to get out of there. Some of them left before, and the police grabbed Eleb Kirk, and he hadn't done anything but stand up on the side. He hadn't been involved in all the action. But I remember that they have LB in the back of the police car and some of the other guys. Other fellows that I thought might be arrested, they had gotten away. But they came while Tyree was talking. They grabbed Tyree. Well, you've got the picture here, and started choking him, dragging him to the paddy wagon here, which they had backed up. When the crowd saw that, they started protesting. And still, they hadn't assaulted any police. The police then surged into the crowd, and I was right there. They started flinging away with these clubs. It was an awful sound that he is hitting these bodies with these clubs and knocking these people down. For some reason, they didn't bother me. I took the horn after Tyree got in the paddy wagon, and I remember going to the paddy wagon after they were dragging people there. How many were there? What were their names? So I could get the lawyers in and so forth. I remember that I caught these cops looking at me, and nobody touched me. After that, others observed that also, and they figured that this one is here with a suit on, and they didn't quite know how to relate to hitting me because maybe they thought that I might be a little different than taking somebody that wouldn't be able to make very much of a protest. Anyways, I was right in the thick of things. The TV camera shows me walking around with a bullhorn, trying to get the crowd to reassemble in another location, and going up to the paddy wagon and looking in. That's the way the situation was. Benjamin McAdoo's end quote. Benjamin McAdoo's involvement with the CCA directly correlates to his later work, which focuses on receiving large institutional projects from the city of Seattle. His efforts in bringing large contracts to the Black construction community begins to reap rewards for his practice in his late career. This brings us to the 1970s in the last pillar of practice. In the 1970s, Benjamin McAdoo would be awarded multiple institutional projects, such as the Central Blood Bank. The Central Blood Bank is located in a heavily industrial and institutional area of south of Seattle in Tukwila, Washington. When looking at the neighborhood scale, we can clearly observe it stands out amongst the other projects. It is in a heavily industrial area of Tukwila. The structures are larger, and it's surrounded by malls, hotels, industrial factories, and the Green River. A 4-story institutional project of monumental scale would be a stylistic change for Benjamin McAdoo. The Blood Bank is located southeast of the I-5 and 405 highway and positioned between the busy streets of Andover Park East, Baker Boulevard, and 68th Ave South. The blood bank is still used for the original purposes. However, the east side of the structure facing 68th Ave South leases the building to commercial businesses and banks. Looking at McAdoo's 1968 hand rendering, we can see the concrete planters placed at each entrance portal. This design decision resulted in a permanent landscaping at the entrances of this brutalist structure. When looking through McAdoo's iteration process, the entrance portals had multiple concrete planter designs before settling upon the rectangular forms seen here today. Although McAdoo turned away from the use of natural materials seen in his early work, he is still looking to incorporate the outdoors and landscaping into this institutional project. Looking at the building section, we can see the open air atrium in the core of the structure. It was annotated by Benjamin McAdoo to have landscaping, a show that although his style had evolved, landscaping would remain even in these institutional projects. Brutalist in appearance, in section we can see the blood bank uses light steel framing system. The long span truss system allows the building to span a greater distance around the atrium core. Benjamin McAdoo collaborated with structural engineer Darrell E. Bolton, mechanical engineer Stanley F. Robertson, and electrical engineer George W. Watt. The building structure has at least one entrance on each facade. The entry portals are recessed into the face of the facade. Pictured here, we can see the main entrance circulation, which has a semicircular driveway leading to the Bloodworks entrance and ample parking to either side. The exterior facade of the building has precast concrete paneling placed into the steel frame system. The building was based on precast concrete panels to control the sun and allow modular interior. This turn towards precast concrete could be influenced by his work in Jamaica, where he got familiar with the material and the ease of construction, or perhaps his stay in Washington, D.C. Nonetheless, this would be the primary material used in his institutional and industrial work. Another notable institutional project in the 1970s was the Seattle City Light and Power, completed in 1981. Like the Central Blood Bank, McAdoo is working with the industrial materials such as precast concrete and corrugated metal sheets. He is using planar geometric forms to create a unique facade around this power plant. Yet another institutional project awarded to Benjamin McAdoo's practice was the Samuel E. Kelly Ethnic Cultural Center, an 8,000 square foot timber frame building with angled monitor roof and large clerestories. This feature can often be seen in factories and industrial buildings to bring in natural light. The UW building was built as a meeting space for minority students. However, in 2011, it was determined to be seismically unsafe and was demolished. The new building by Rolanda Architects was designed by Rolanda Architects, was inspired by McAdoo's original work, the monitor roofing, and they expanded the structure to 26,000 square feet to support the growing number of students at the university. Towards the end of his life, Benjamin McAdoo would take out columns in the Seattle Times to write about the inequalities in the Black community, including but not limited to redlining and institutional racism. Albeit 40 years ago, this column stands as a warning for our present day. In April of this year, while I was working on this research, the CDC declared racism a serious public health threat. I'd like to read to you an excerpt from the Crime of Racism article. Benjamin McAdoo states, Black criminals, like white criminals, mainly prey on members of their own race. It would therefore appear that the proposed 23rd Avenue precinct could afford greater protection for the Blacks and others than is presently the case. Also, Black citizens should be able to better monitor the quality of police performance and more effectively deal with instances involving racism at a local station than what is now possible with the existing police headquarters in its downtown location. Success in policing any neighborhood depends on the ability of the police to deal justly and honestly in a manner that is blind to race or any other superfluous considerations. In their fight against crime, police should give the crime of racism a top priority. This article, published on December 7th, 1980, would serve as Benjamin McAdoo's last known written statement to the public before his sudden passing 6 months after publication. On June 18th, 1981, in Seattle, Washington, Benjamin F. McAdoo Jr. passed away suddenly. He is buried in Volunteer Park, and in 2013, his wife Alice Thelma Dent McAdoo was buried alongside him. The legacy Benjamin McAdoo left behind is truly an inspiration. When I was thinking of a single word that could characterize his big life, what comes to mind is the word hope. His hope for a better future comes through in all areas of his life, personally and professionally. In the face of so many obstacles, he waged political discourse, challenged powerful entities, and actively advocated for reform and abolition of institutionalized racism. He strived for a better world for his children, the Black community, and all marginalized communities, low-income families, the profession of architecture, and the world at large. His ambition and perseverance for a better future inspires me greatly, and I hope you all have been inspired today as well. Thank you to Docomomo WEWA, BOLA Architects, and the University of Washington for getting this research started. And I'll hand this over to Tyler.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Sierra. So the only problem with the Zoom room is we can't all applaud and stand in our chairs, but nicely done. A wonderful presentation. It really is such important history to bring to light and such an important part of our understanding of this period of modernism in Seattle. Fascinating to hear. And every time I learn more, I think of new things, and it's amazing to think how those institutional projects late in his career really were about the team, about the people he was working with and who he was bringing into the industry to create these projects and opportunities for so many. That's a fascinating connection to make. And it's also really evident that you've had wonderful access to UW special collections and able to really get to understand the Benjamin McAdoo collection, which is there, which, as I understand, and it's much less than you, it's quite extensive. Can you talk a little bit about the archive at the UW special collections and what you've seen there or your impressions of it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So in the UW Special Collections Library, Benjamin McAdoo has two collections. He has his architectural drawings and then his documents, which are stored in two different collections. So in his documents, you'll see things where he would collect newspaper clippings, historical information that was coming out at the time, photographs, things of that nature. And then also he has his architectural drawings that were stored in tubes. He was extremely organized. A man that was this busy and working on this many projects really had to be. And so his drawings are all very well organized together in fabulous condition. Yeah, we're working on processing them right now, working
Wonderful.
on finishing up the processing of the drawings.
Yeah, and certainly a treasure trove. I'm so grateful that you've been able to access that, and that's only sort of amplifying the work. Great. Well, working through the chat, we welcome questions from the audience on the work. I'll start with one that's coming in that's sort of about his early life, about which I know it's something that we're still sort of looking into, but it's about his background as a carpenter, or perhaps his father as a carpenter, and what that type work was like. Do you know much about his early life in Los Angeles before or what his work was like there, coming to Seattle?
Not more than what I've shared tonight. That is an area of his life that I'm still actively trying to research, and going through his documents, I think we'll be able to get more information on that in the coming months.
Great. That's great. So I see one other question about maybe this is something. What were his favorite types of interior wood materials? So it's a very detail-oriented question. I don't know, from the drawings, are you able to see specifications of different types of wood or different sort of signature usage of things in there?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head for his interior spaces. I see a lot of cedar. That seems to be his go-to wood choice. So I think I can look into that further.
Great. So just going down the chat, there's a comment that says his architectural influences appear to be typical of the period. Did he identify any mentors or any earlier other Pacific Northwest modernists that he worked with or learned from?
Not that I can tell at this moment, no.
Okay. I've seen a couple of things here and there. I believe there may be some connection to Chiarelli and Kirk as people who have who've signed off on his early licensing or things like that. But absolutely, those are things that are still forthcoming. Yeah, fascinating. Great. One other question. Just curious. Looking at others that they're coming in. Okay, here's maybe a preservation question. Is there any thought or interest in designating existing or extant McAdoo buildings? Looks like they have good integrity. I know you've been in touch with a couple of homeowners. I don't know if landmarking has come up in your conversations, but maybe talk a little bit about your relationship with the owner of the Ota residence.
Yes, I am in contact with the owner of the Kenji Ota residence. He's been very kind in letting me know the history of the property. It has only transferred ownership twice since the Otas lived there. So it has been really closely guarded. It was the current day owner purchased it from a Japanese architect who had purchased it from the Otas. And so he had lived there for a few decades and really, as an architect, wanted to take care and preserve his home and the legacy that it had. So I've been getting a lot of information from the owner, and probably go get my interior photos soon.
Uh-huh.
If I can catch a break with school for a little bit, get over there. So yeah, more coming on that. That is probably my favorite residence so far that I have found.
And I know that the city of Bothell was looking into some of the landmarking of his properties up there, but again, we're still sort of investigating that as we go. One other question from Aaron Doherty. Have you had the opportunity to visit his home and office, or any impressions of those spaces?
His office in Capitol Hill is not too far from where I live, so I walk by it quite frequently. I have not been inside. Unfortunately or fortunately, given that we had a lot more time during COVID, I started this project in March of 2021, where I haven't been able to enter a lot of these buildings because of the COVID restrictions. Like the blood bank, for example, unless I was giving blood, I could not enter the building. And a lot of the owners weren't comfortable allowing people into the spaces. So as things are opening up and vaccinations are coming out, I think I'll be able to get into more of the structures and create more connections with the people that are still owning these properties and with his home, his current home.
Mm-hmm. Great. With his father's connection in construction leading to him becoming an architect, the question is, did any of his children follow in his footsteps?
It's a fabulous question. I could not speak on that with 100% certainty. I do believe that one of his children did get involved in mechanical engineering, but I'll have to double check on that for you. Hopefully we'll be connecting with his children soon.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one other sort of FYI that's offered in the chat, he was a member of the Hilltop community, that sort of prominent modernist community on the east side, and thus rubbed shoulders with many of the architects who live there. So certainly a part of a larger community of architects and part of the bigger scene there. Great. All right. Well, wonderful. Oh, I'm continuing to monitor the chat, and I know you've just spurred so many new ideas as part of this work. But as we're approaching 8 o'clock here, I will start wrapping up and thank everyone for coming. Thank everyone for being a part of our Docomomo US WEWA presentation. Again, an applause for Sierra for her wonderful work in sharing this important scholarship as we go. And we do, as Docomomo, we have other events that are coming up. So if you're continuing to be interested in Docomomo and advocating for modernist work in the Northwest, in December we have an annual meeting and a cocktail party, which has taken on some different forms with restrictions. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to return to some in-person type of gatherings. But we still have details coming on that. But definitely stay in touch with our newsletter and emails and stay involved with Docomomo. So we are part of a larger US organization. So the national chapter, Docomomo US, is holding an event November 11th in New York City, and they are the Modernism in America Awards, where they really highlight successful heritage projects or preservation work, and celebrate modernism across the United States. So great. Yep. And I see Eugenia has put in a reminder in the chat there that this presentation has been recorded. So if you're interested in accessing it later, please email us, and once it's posted and archived, we'll be able to share the link widely. All right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and conclude the event. Thank you all for coming. Thanks again to Sierra, and we hope to see you at future Docomomo WEWA events. All right, everyone, take care.